All right, go for it.
Okay. SIG network policy working group meeting today. Everybody be nice to each other. Especially nice to Ricardo because he hasn't eaten in like 24 hours.
Yeah, I've just eaten before the meeting because I was with after the meeting because I was with a headache. So
all right, go ahead. So where were you? So we were just getting back up to speed with what happened last week. So go ahead, Ricardo.
Yeah, so last week we have decided to assemble a really short document with the four user stories that we think they were in the issue 30 or 33, I can't remember, and that we decided that it could ship to the V1 API, network policy API, without any not huge impacts. And so I have taken the responsibility to assemble this document, and I've sent to you in the SIG network channel, and I think that also in Slack. So everyone could take a look into the document. We can close our concerns about this document and present this to SIG network in the meeting next Thursday. I think that this Thursday. So getting the okay from the group, we can start opening the issues for the caps of each of the changes, and then starting the PRs of the caps, and then moving to improving the V1 network policy without having impact into our job, into our work with the V2 network policy. So I've sent the document link to you in the Slack, in the Zoom chat. But if you want, I can share my screen here, and we can, like, Andrew has made some comments. Abhishek also has made some comments. My expectation about this is that we close this document today and can present this in the next meeting this Thursday. So yeah, if you want to share, and go ahead, Andrew. I think that's better. So we are seeing Andrew's screen right now, and the first proposal was the port ranges and port set. I have organized this document into the objective. Abhishek suggested that we put the limitations with V1 API and the problems to be solved. So the first one is port ranges, port set, allow a network policy to contemplate a set of ports in a single rule. The idea here is that we have like a struct or something like that, because the V1 API, the ports field, that's an array that needs a declaration of each single port to be contemplated. Like if I want to declare a rule with ports from 6,000 to 9,000, except the 6,379, this requires that each and every port be declared. So Andrew, we've put in the problems to be solved that a user wants to allow ingress in multiple ports, and Andrew has proposed that we probably don't use this example here. I think that the message of this example is wrong. I agree with that. So using like a sort of problem, like I want to allow the egress to the node port range of a different cluster, like egress to port 30,000 to 32,000. I would need to declare like each port in the network policy, and we want to solve this kind of problem here. Is that clear for everyone?
Yeah, I think so. So can I can remove this?
Yeah.
So y'all got to 4. Can we just look at a high level what the 4 things are? Just curious.
Sure. So the first one is the port range, port set.
Yeah.
Next one is the select namespace by name in network policy. The third one is the node selector for network policy. And the fourth one is the cluster scoped network policy. The idea of the last one, the cluster scoped network policy, is a new object and not changing the older one, but we are getting there soon.
Oh, I see. So this is just taking those and okay, cool.
Yeah, that's basically where we like what the 4 came from. And I think what we're trying to do right now is, it seemed like we got consensus from the broader group on these 4 as like kind of I don't want to say low hanging fruit, but like things we can get started on for V1. And I think what we want out of this meeting is, if there are strong objections to any of these 4 that are worth calling out, we should do that right now, so that if we need more time to think these through and reason about some of the use cases, we can do that. Otherwise, I think Ricardo wants to pull the larger SIG network group for if these are going in the right direction or not.
Exactly. I'm shy, so probably I'm going to ask you to do that, Jay.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So any of us can do it, but yeah, I like the way this argumentation is set up with the limits and then the problems to be solved.
Yeah, the main idea here is, okay, we've been discussing this like in the last 6 months, and this is what we want to do right now with V1, but we want also to do some other stuffs in V2, but doing this will solve a lot of problems for the community and the users, and it doesn't seem so hard to ship this. So the second, yeah.
Sorry, can I also ask one other question related to the port ranges port set? Would it be a completely different use case or an extension of this use case if we said that for, let's say you wanted to write an ingress from port or something like that? Because right now, when you write an ingress rule, you only can specify the ports on the pod that is receiving that packet, but you can't necessarily specify the port of the sender. So if you wanted to just sort of say, I don't want packets from well-known DOS attack ports or something, you can't say that with our policy today, for example.
You mean the source port?
Pardon me?
Yeah, and you mean the source port?
The source port, yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
That could span,
I think that because of the nature of the CNIs, I think, okay, that's my opinion. The source port, they are not really, I don't think relevant to the CNIs, because the implementation of the CNIs is much like the AWS security groups and other stuff. Like, you are more concerned about the destination port, like the origin, the destination and the destination port, if they are ingress or the egress, other than the source port, because you don't control the source port. So that's my opinion.
Unless, Govind, you meant like the source port of the receiving end.
Sorry, no, I meant the source port of the originator. So if whoever the client is who sent the packet, I want to disable or I want to reject packets that come from well-known DOS attack source ports.
Gotcha. Okay. Then yeah, I agree with Ricardo that I don't think, yeah.
So that would be just some sort of a like cloud specific implementation or something. Is my understanding correct?
I don't think it's necessarily like based on clouds. I think it is like an implementation detail where I guess a network policy implementation could block source ports, like outbound source ports at certain ranges and whatnot. But in my experience, that's not usually required. Like, you block it based on what the outbound destination port is and not what the source port is.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm not really sure what you meant by that question.
So okay, let me give you an example, I guess, or maybe this isn't going off topic. Maybe we can come back to this afterwards. I was just curious if this is related to the first, user journey here.
I don't think it's not unrelated. It's just, I think it's fundamentally crossing boundaries of the data model, though, Gobin, because even if, like, I don't know whether it's a valid use case or not. I can't really comment much on that, but I just know that the way ports are now, they're tied to an ingress or an egress rule that you're making on a specific policy to secure a specific pod, right? So it would be, it would be very awkward. So for the purposes of this conversation, which is this document, which is low-hanging fruit, right? Because you're going to be contorting the data model, that it's not relevant here.
I see. Okay.
I'm all for like, you know, whatever, we could put it somewhere else and talk about it as a tier 2 use case or something.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I think it's worth clarifying, right? To me, like the reason in the past it hasn't is because source ports are generally random from the client. So, and usually like the contract implementation or the connection tracking implementation, like just tracks the source port to where the egress destination is. And when the packet comes back, it just maps the source port back to the inbound packet. So in nature, it's dynamic and it's not supposed to be tracked, I think.
I see. So you would say that only source IPs would be used for something like that?
Something like what exactly?
For prevention of DOS. The reason I was asking is because, like, if you think about how Kubernetes is, is on the receiving end of packets from the outside of the the internet. There's many layers of protection on the way, but if you're deployed in, like, say, an on-prem environment or something like that, you don't have the luxury of, like, cloud load balancers doing DOS protection for you and things like that. So, and you could potentially see network policy as a way to do real-time, like, DOS prevention on your pods. That's what I was thinking about. And IP and port was a good combination to come up with for DOS prevention. So that's what I was asking. And this sounded related, but I guess it's to Jay's point, maybe it's contorting the network policy model.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like I'm missing some pieces there, but yeah, I'd love to chat about that more. Maybe.
Okay, we can take it offline.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right.
This could be also like another evolution of the API, but without the port set. Like, okay, now we want to support the source port field, but on an XPROM. What do you think, Obi?
I think, yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I just wasn't, like, I think when I didn't have the realization in my head that this would actually fundamentally be altering sort of the data model or the purpose of our policy, and that's why it probably is not just an extension of the use case here, but rather a much broader scoped exercise. So that makes sense.
Okay, great, thank you. So, can we move to the next one? Select namespace by name in a network policy. So this one, there is like a large discussion about whatever labels or names are authorities in namespace, in the SIG architecture. I recommend everyone to read that and also propose. But the idea here is that we want to allow a network policy to use a namespace name as a selector instead of labels. The limitations with the View1 API is that the API supports only selecting pods by label, which is fine. We like that, but also we want to select by namespace, namespace by labels and by name, because we have some problems specified below in the SIG architecture mailing lists. So the first one is that a group of users wants to allow ingress in their pods from any pods in another namespace, but they don't want to trust the label as a selector of the namespace. Because per cluster airbag, any user can put their own labels in their own namespace and become a rogue namespace. So this is a problem. I didn't solve that because we are pretty restrictive in my company with the policies. But I think that you can allow a user to put their own labels in their own namespaces, and this can, like, bring a sense of, okay, I only allow from namespace with this label, and Andrew wants to communicate with my pods, and he puts a label without asking anyone. So you lose the authority of the namespace label. There is another proposal here from Andrew, that namespaces are often standalone and may not need to be logically categorized using labels. Yeah, exactly, like cube system. We don't want to use labels in this case to select. So referencing by name prevents unnecessary labeling of namespace to fit into the network policy API. So anyone have any consideration about this? I think this is one that is going to bring probably more discussion that the cluster API, the cluster scope or the node selector, because there is a sense in SIG architecture. I think that we shouldn't use names but labels, but I think that this is something that that is needed in the API. So let me just accept your
Ricardo, I'm not
change
sure
here.
if it's a solution. Might just be more problems, but I had seen where the service v2 APIs, they had a similar discussion, and seems like the direction, I have to go back and check the specifics, but the direction was that they were intending to have the cluster and infrastructure personas, labeling those namespaces in the context of like a gateway class. And so I guess when you said moving away from putting labels on namespaces, I guess I was worried that folks are actively heading more towards that at the same time. I'm just not sure if that's going to be all that, going to be agreed upon, rather. You know what I mean? Outside.
Yeah, I think the key thing here is that we want to propose that you can select by label or name. I don't think we want to say like you have to use names from now on. It's going to be one or the other, I think.
Oh, I see. Thanks.
Because I think there are valid use cases for, I mean, I think it's like, I think in the API it's a little clunky, but like there are use cases for label selecting namespaces. Like you can say like, like team engineering, whatever, or that's like kind of the classic example you see out there. But then there are cases where like you just have one namespace that's isolated to do one thing, and it may not necessarily belong to any team, but you want to like kind of allow or deny list it in your policies, and it'd be kind of awkward to force assign like a team label to it when it doesn't belong to a team.
Sure. The example they used was internal versus external or a network gateway, right? But yeah, no, I see your point.
So we are not discussing the implementation specific details here, right? We are just talking about these are the user stories that are required. Right. Good.
Yeah.
Good point.
And the idea here is that is there anyone that have like a strong opposition about this story, or do you think that this is enough to bring this to the SIG network meeting next Thursday? Like this is something we want to do in the CAS. One, two, three. Okay,
so one thing, would it be useful to change the ordering of these two problems that we're solving? Because I feel that the usability of listing namespace by names is likely a better selling point than around the multi-tenancy story and security around label selectors for namespaces. Because this one is more ambiguous in terms of like whether it's an actual problem or not, whereas being able to select namespaces by their like specific names is more of a improvement to the usability of the API.
I don't think it matters. Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
I've seen in the SIG architecture like a discussion about virtual labels, but I don't think it's gonna ship like in 6 months or 1 year. So
yeah, basically what I'm saying is that I think we should order these problems to be solved in the order that we think are most important to least important. And so I'm basically asking, do we feel that this problem we're solving is more important than the first one? And should we swap the order?
So I think the first problem statement is also related to or relevant to the admission controller's namespace selector. So maybe there is, I guess, like a broader user story in that particular statement.
But at the very least, though, the second one is easier to understand, which is also a good reason to have it first. So I would say swap them, and
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
I mean, as far as swapping them goes, I don't think it's really worth worrying about which one comes for.
Okay. Shall we move to the next one? Okay, so this one is node selector for network policy. The objective of this one is allow a network policy to select as a target a group of nodes by their labels. So the limitations with Vue1 API is that the network policy does not enforce policies from a pod's node local traffic, other nodes in the cluster and pods with host network through. And we want to solve a problem. I'm going to read Andrew's first and then my next. So the last one is a group of nodes in a cluster may be labeled to run a specific class of workloads where all traffic between those nodes should be allowed, but any traffic to other nodes should be restricted. Like is this the case of liveness probe also, Andrew? You think?
Liveness probes?
Yeah. Sorry. Like I was saying that because of the limitations. I'm sorry. I'm just moving ahead and we can discuss this later. So the other prop. Go ahead.
I think it's explicitly not that case because I think the network policy V1 API, to not break it, you'd have to allow node local, right? Don't you have to allow like the node to talk to pods or something like its local pods?
Yeah.
I was thinking about this thing here.
Oh, okay.
And a group of users works in a really restricted environment with denial rules by default, and they're responsible for the cluster monitoring and need to open a rule so Prometheus running in cluster can reach the kubelet read-only port for every node of the cluster, but only that. So this case is like I have a namespace that's restricted with Prometheus, but I need to reach like only API server to discover the nodes, and then the kubelet read-only port with the metrics from that nodes. So those are the two problems that we want to solve.
So regarding Jay's comment around pods no local traffic, and maybe this is going into implementation details, but I think it's good to have an answer for this ahead of time. I agree, like it'd be a breaking change to the API if by default we denied no local traffic and you had to then add a network policy to allow the local traffic to pass through. But then it also does raise concern that if we did like add node selectors in the APIs, then there would need to be an easy way to say allow from local without having to know ahead of time like what the label selector for the current node is, or like there need to be some built-in API field or something that says like deny from all of their nodes but allow local, because maybe you for like liveliness probes or whatever. And it also sounds like the default should be to allow node local always, to not break existing users.
This makes me wonder whether this one, if we do like a fractal approach to what you said earlier, which is the easiest, simplest thing should go at the top, whether this policy might be slightly more complicated than, like, for example, the namespace name one, which is just a big home run, right? In terms of like, you know, ordering of the policies, since the purpose of this document is more to make a proposal than to get right. Like, do we want to bump the namespace one above this one in terms of the ability to make a clean argument around it?
It's already up.
Yeah.
I don't have a strong opinion on that. I'm just saying if you want to, that's just something I'll throw out there. But
no, we're saying that the namespace one is already above the.
It is already above it. Oh yeah. Okay, I didn't see that. Okay. Is there anything else that? Yeah. Okay. Anyways, just to keep in mind. Yeah. So it sounds like that's a wrinkle. That would be tricky to express, right? Like.
Yeah, maybe that's going into the cap. Sorry, go ahead.
I was saying this is the user story that I kind of struggle with a little, is that I feel like maybe this is something like a subsection of the next user story, which is the cluster scope network policy. because I feel like this is more geared towards the administrators than the developers. And then if that is the case, then it will be a V1 of a new resource, and that is not kind of breaking existing V1 network policy API. But if we do strongly feel that the developer API should also include node selectors, then we need to explain why, how we can not have the story break, backwards compatibility.
Okay, so I think the way you decide that is, is there a way to do this that doesn't break anything backwards compatible that can be evolved on top of? Because if so, it could stand alone, but if not, it's maybe better to lump it in with a more complex body of work. Right? Like, is there a simple version of this that gets us 80% of what we care about that isn't going to be, that can be improved on? Like always whitelisting or allowing node traffic for the first iteration of this. Is that like a valid, logical thing to do?
I think so.
So maybe we should just add that as a bullet, just because this is supposed to be a simple version of that policy. And then we can add in the cluster scope that expanding that node select, whatever, something like that, if there's a potential. Oh, this seems like a hard problem, though. I don't know if we're going to figure this out today.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time figuring out how the node selector and cluster scope policy are intertwined. Like I definitely see the overlapping use case because both are targeted for like administrative use cases. But whether you select pods across one namespace or multiple namespaces, you would still select nodes in the same way, which is specific to this one. Am I missing something?
No, I think your understanding is correct. The only thing that I wanted to bring it up is, or I wanted to add this as part of like as a subsection of the next user story, is because that way we don't have to, kind of give an explanation about how it does not affect backwards compatibility, because it's not something that we intend to add to the network policy V1 API. But yeah, this is the story that I feel like needs a lot more thought than. In my mind, I still don't have clear answers to this one.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I sort of can see Abhishek's point here. Like I could see it going either way, but it literally is a cluster scoped policy just because it's spanning namespaces, even if you don't.
How does it span namespaces?
Well, you're talking about a host port, right? So you're talking about one pod being able to access things on a node, and you can have any number of namespace things running processes on that node that it could access, right?
Yeah, because your pods are not, or your nodes are not really caring about whether the pod is belonging to namespace A or namespace B. The node is hosting pods of all kinds of namespaces.
Yeah,
so
I mean, it's just,
right, but the policy enforcement is still at the namespace level, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. This is weird.
Okay. Okay, so I guess okay, because I don't want to spend too much time on this one thing, but it sounds like there's a lot of thinking that needs to go through it, and most of it is probably like for the KEP. Do we still find the use case compelling enough to write that KEP, or do we feel like too abstract? Let's punt it for later. And maybe Jay, that's a call for you to decide.
Oh, I would say Ricardo's owning the KEP story, so I don't know. If I had to write, I would not want to write this KEP, but I don't want.
Who did we say is the owner for this one last time? I remember we started assigning people to. I don't know where in the repo you put that, Jay.
Yeah.
Ricardo is owning the overall what KEPs get written right now story.
Right, but
I was going to distribute those, yeah, but Node selector, I think, was something from Chris Luciano, right?
That was Jay.
Oh,
Jay, you're a side.
here we go. Yeah.
But yeah, that's a water carrying thing though. I talked to a lot of people about that, right? Like I think I've talked to you, Andrew, and so but yeah, I mean if I'm the owner of it, I don't mind writing. I guess okay, if I'm the owner of it, Ricardo and you all, I mean everybody really decides that we want to do this and we want to do it. I'm happy to do it either way. I'm happy to do it as an orthogonal cap that gets rejected or accepted maybe, or I'm happy to do it as a part of what Abhishek is doing and collaborate with Abhishek.
So what I'm actually hearing is that we should not pursue this one, and we should see how cluster scope network policies go and revisit. I don't know if other people are thinking about it.
I was going to suggest that we prioritize both from the two first port ranges and select namespace by name, and then go to cluster scope network policy, because this probably is something that who is this bothering? That's my question. Like, how many people is asking this node selector? What's the need of the community?
I think their needs are pretty. I don't know. At least from the Jay's like previous stuff on all the user stories that people put in, and from what I see internally at VMware, and I think what Mike kind of talked about before, not being able to enforce any policies on any host level process is a big gap in network policy. Also the fact that so by that first point, that also means any pod with host network is also able to bypass network policy. So there's kind of like, you can bypass network policy rules if you can set yourself as host network.
Yeah, it's almost like the people that have thought a lot about this see this as a problem, but it's not something that's popular in the community because most people in the community haven't thought through the security holes that are sitting there. So it's a weird one, right? Like,
yeah,
it's classic like inverse bike shedding, right? Like the people who really know what's going on are like, yeah, we have to have this, but it's not an easy thing to talk about. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it sounds like it's important, but very thorny problem. So Ricardo, good to remove it from this doc at least, and we can revisit but maybe a follow-up proposal for other V1 stuff, but for
Sure.
this one.
For me,
Any
that's
objections? Okay. Anyone else object to keeping this?
I mean, I feel like the best would be to move it to the bottom so that we don't necessarily have to remove it. But I'm okay removing it, but that's another option.
Yeah, I think the assumption is that anything in this doc, we're going to open a KEP issue for it. So I guess the question is, are we cool to open a KEP issue for the node selectors at this moment?
Yeah, okay, good point. Yeah, let's get rid of it. And does anybody else have any opinions?
So here we go. It's okay. So the last one is the cluster scoped network policy. The objective is enforce network policy rules for a set of or all namespaces in a cluster. Limitations with V1, the API only supports namespace rules, but you cannot create a rule that applies to a set of namespace or the whole cluster. The API only supports expressing the intent of a developer role and does not capture the requirements of an administrator role. And what we want to solve here is that the cluster admins wants that all the namespace have a default deny rule for ingress and egress, but it's up to the developer to open a new namespace for a specific network policy, or even that it's well known that DNS is a required service that any pod in the cluster needs to reach. So network policy always allowing any pod in any namespace to reach the core DNS pods is necessary. I think that this one, yeah, go ahead.
Do you have any objections with the suggestions that I added here?
Actually, no way. I've read it, including yours also. I've just. I don't know.
Sorry,
Abhishek, Gobind.
Can I make a quick clarification to the first bullet of problems to be solved? Cluster admin wants that all namespaces have a default deny rule for ingress and egress, but it's up to the developer to open a new namespace specific network policy. So if I'm understanding this correctly, if an administrator puts a cluster scope network policy, says no namespaces can talk to each other on this cluster, is the developer now able to go and write a network policy to open up some communication between two namespaces on that cluster?
Yeah, so something that we have discussed, I think, in the last meeting is that we have two classes of, in my opinion, two classes of cluster scope network policy. You have like a default deny that's protecting the namespace, but that's not required. You can bypass it. And you have like a compliance network policy that doesn't allow your, like, I'm going to allow you to reach core DNS even if you don't want to, or I'm not going to allow you to reach like the port from anywhere, because that's a policy from the cluster. But I think that this one we should like evolve better in the CAP. How are we going to reach this?
Okay.
Yeah, Gobin, we kind of discussed, I think, when we spoke about precedence in our call, like when we spoke about this kind of problem, maybe we can, detail,
okay.
But it does require both kind of precedence, like, something which is, has higher precedence and then some default precedence.
Right. So some sort of inheritance and some sort of hierarchy, both have to be taken into account, correct?
I'm actually counting on both of you to design the CAP, because you have like the data model and what's expected. I am like pretty limited in this one, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Kevin, what's the difference between precedence and inheritance?
Sorry, when I said inheritance, I meant like, the admin sets sort of a super, maybe the base policy or something, and then the developers can go and like keep adding more stuff to it. And the hierarchy is like, the administrator can set a rule, and that always gets enforced before the developers. And if that action, denies it, then it denies the action entirely. It doesn't go to the developer.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
This is just going to be a very big CAP route, right? Like this is a tricky one because, I mean, what is this CAP really going to be, right? Like, I mean, you're going to have to put priorities into it. You're going to have to put, I mean, like, you're going to have that thing that, I saw that thing in the last community meeting, the Antria community meeting, where you had that big division of priorities with decimals and all that stuff. Abhishek, like, I don't know, like, how are you going to do this? Is it going to, do we break this into, is there a way to orthogonalize it? Or do you just want to propose it the way, like this?
No, I don't think it's going to be one-to-one mapped to what, we discussed in Antria. This will be a little, more, we'll try to address more use cases from the community, which are more geared towards the administrator use case. But
I'm just saying it's complicated. I don't mean that not to bring up the Antria community, that's kind of irrelevant, but it's just really complicated, right?
So yeah, that's what I kind of like asked this question in the first, like, in the beginning, is that we are not going to talk about implementation or like the API sketch as in each of these stories. I think when we propose this to the SIG network, it's more like, these are the user stories that are more common and agreed upon, and we will work as CAPs for these user stories and then detail them individually. But I do agree, this is going to be a like large effort. It's not a straightforward.
Okay, but you think this maps to one CAP or many CAPs?
I think this is similar to what the service API thing is, that you have to come and implement a new API sketch and for this particular user story. So it's an effort which is like, think about like the IPv6 like dual stack effort. It's a very large effort, but it was, I think, a single CAP, which then maybe spans across releases or things like that. So that's
I
how.
mean, I'm almost like tend to think that like we should be basically this doc should have this as like actually this will be maybe the purpose of this working group moving forward. Here's like the small improvements we could make, and then like really the main focus of the group moving forward would be to do if you think this is the scope of the service APIs group, that from now on our meetings are, you know, a majority of it is planning that, and then the minority of the meetings is figuring out all the other smaller use cases. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think this is like a two-pronged approach, like where we try to get these additive use cases, you know, on a faster pace. But this is the one that will, you know, will require the group to, you know, come up with the sketch on a longer timeline basis. But it is going to be like a group effort. I'm not saying that, you know, Gobind and I am going to just write something and this is what it is, like, dictate.
It's a working group, right? So that's maybe it's our working group. I don't know. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. It seems like it doesn't fit in this doc because of that. It seems like it fits in this doc as a proposal, but it doesn't seem like it's symmetrical with the other caps to me. It seems like it's part of the overall proposal we make to the SIG, but it's like, here are two caps we're going to write, and then we're going to transition to doing asynchronous work on the V1 network policy stuff. And then as a group, we're going to focus on cluster scope to network policies, because that solves a bunch of other problems that we haven't addressed, like priorities and all these administrative use cases. We've got like 4 or 5 of them that people have put up, you know, including Gobin's use case that he brought up today, right? So I don't know, that's like what I would say, but I don't know. I'm happy to include it in this doc if y'all want. I just wanted to spitball that for a little bit.
So I thought the purpose of this talk was to, you know, talk to the SIG network and see these are the ideas that the group is going to work on. Some of these ideas are something which will be faster, you know, which can be done immediately with smaller caps. And one of this idea will require a larger effort, but these are the items that we are looking at actively. And hopefully there's no one in the SIG network who thinks that this is a completely bad idea, that we should not be.
Okay. Oh, if that's the case, then yeah, that's fine. I thought it was specific.
I mean, this was my understanding.
Yeah, my interpretation from what Ricardo said last week was these are just the use cases that we as a group think are the most important, but also the use cases that we can add to the existing networking.kubernetes.io v1 networking API group. So I agree with Jay, like this is a huge effort, but technically speaking, it can be a non-breaking additional resource in v1, which is why it landed here.
Okay, cool. So this is not a KEPS doc. This is a things that we're doing doc for v1.
This is the things that we're going to write KEPS for docs.
That's a summary of what we want to do in the next cycle with KEPS, and keep working in the other stuffs in network policy.
Okay, we should just add maybe we should probably add a note there that this is different than the other two. You know, like in Sesame Street where they have an apple and an orange and they say one of these is not like the other, right? There's something different here that I think we should express somehow other than, but you know.
Okay, so are you proposing us to remove this, or
No,
can we show this? Keep it? Okay.
You keep it, but I'm just saying we probably should at least have a note there that says this is a long-term project. The other two are short-term projects, you know.
We can do this.
Yeah, in all caps.
Or instead just maybe do can add large, like t-shirt sizes maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, large, small. Yeah.
I don't know if the namespace one is small. Let's call it medium, only because it may end up being a larger conversation around how generic resources should reference namespaces. So we may have to be pulled into that in order to unblock us for the namespace one.
Sure.
Can I remove this? Who added this?
This was me. I was going through this, and I just, I couldn't help but think that if this is the first set of things we're going to propose, we should have FQDN addressed in network policy. It comes up so frequently. It's probably the biggest hole that we have in our API today from my customer conversations.
Can you be a bit more exact?
Oh, sure. Oh, sorry. My apologies. I thought this was. I can write this out too. Effectively, instead of writing IP, CIDRs or labels or whatever, you should just be able to say, I don't want my POS to talk to google.com or something, whatever, right? There's stuff like that, and sure, people could do the mapping and write the IP addresses, but the extra convenience is so much nicer because they can comprehend that policy when they read it, which is worth a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I've also seen similar use case requirement.
Yeah.
How would you even implement that as a network policy without controlling DNS? I mean, that's out of the scope of SIG network to do that, because you'd have to.
Yeah, this is kind of where the border between the network policy and service mesh, I think, kind of play in, because I agree with Jay. This is network policy by name is L3, maybe L4, right? DNS is kind of going into the whole stack, I think, which gets interesting because you're kind of exploding the scope of what network policy can do at that point.
I do feel like it's a kind of a cool operator mesh use case thing, though. I think it's another user story that would be great to put in there in the Markdown doc, just not in this one.
Sorry, go ahead, Abhishek.
Abhishek?
I think it was me. So I agree no problem. I agree that's a nice user story. Cilium actually supports that, but in a layer 7 also basis, they implement these with an envoy capturing stuffs and directly into you can do get, you cannot do get, you can go to this DNS call, to this URL or to this DNS. So I think that the problem adding this is not that the field won't support it, but how the CNIs are going to support it. They are needing to open the packet and see what the FQDN that's going to be called. So I think it's worth to bring this to the discussion, but thinking only with IP tables, I know that IP tables cannot support that. So it's up to folks using BPF or folks using
But Calico has DNS policy, and they use IP tables.
CRDs?
Pretty sure, but I mean, to be fair, I do want to use the last 5 minutes talking about the actual policy, not the implementation, just to sort of make sure that we at least agree on the premise. If that
sounds good.
Yeah. So to your point, Andrew, about network policy being a sort of a layer 3, layer 4 concept, I completely agree. I think of FQDN as sort of labels, right? Labels also get translated into IP addresses, however they do. That's how the policy gets enforced. So I just think of it as metadata. Somebody just has to sort of translate it and put it in IP terms, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I guess we're going back to implementation details, but if I'm just thinking about service, I think that makes sense, because you can take the FQDN of a service, and if you know the cluster DNS stuff, you can derive the set of pods that represent that FQDN. But then if you go outside the cluster and you just have generic FQDNs, how do you assign that to pods? And does it make sense for network policy to try to do that? I guess is the.
I think it's the same thing, because you could use an external ref service, right, and then label that, and then work your way around. Because at some point there's an external state of a DNS to IP mapping, and then once on the wire, IP datagrams will have IP addresses which reflect that, and then I think the conversation quickly gets to the point where you're like, well, how often should I sync those names? Because then I got to be able to make sure an IP address doesn't change while, or DNS name doesn't change. But you know, all those tripping blocks aside, I don't think that we should limit ourselves just because our current policy implementation tools talk more about DNS, talk more about IPs than DNS. You know, anyways, I think it's the same, I guess.
And I'm happy to sort of fill out the, you know, and put a template around it, just like the other policies here, if that's, you know, if that helps. But I just wanted to sort of call out the fact that this is probably one of the, you know, very sort of popular asks of Kubernetes.
Go ahead, Jay.
I was just going to say that I don't think we have this user story yet captured.
Yeah, it's the first time I'm hearing it, and I'm really curious about it now that you've brought it up, Govind. Do you feel that we should discuss it some more and think about it before and decide if they should go into this doc?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to. Like, do you want me to sort of put it in the main user story doc that we were all sort of contributing to, or?
Yeah, I would PR it in there. That way we have it, because that's why we have those tier 2 stories. They're things that people want, but we have no idea how we could possibly create them. Right?
User stories.
I think there was a long time an issue also somebody raised, so maybe we can refer to that issue in Kubernetes SIG network. But I think it is, like, from the networking perspective, it is a little challenging to implement it. But I do agree that this is like a valid use case, like where people don't want to write IP blocks and would prefer them to be, you know, dynamically resolved. But I'll copy paste the issue once I find it.
And do we feel that that is completely separate from being able to select services, or like they're related but can be done separately?
I missed the question. Could you say it one more time?
Don't worry about it. We can discuss next time.
I was bothering him in Slack, sorry.
Don't worry about it. So I guess like my question for Ricardo is like, do we want to wait then and discuss the FQDN use case more before we send this out?
I think, in my opinion, that's the same thing as the source port. We can move forward and probably catch this in the issue, like in the caps. Like, okay, we wanna change this. We can make our first cycle that's related to adding some newer fields, and then we can make another cycle that we want to support like FQDNs in the from or in the two rules also. I think that's what one thing doesn't block other. That's my opinion. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I guess I was worried that if we're sending this doc to SIG Network and we're saying these are the things we've talked about and the use cases we want to tackle, and we're going to write caps for it, then I don't want us to, like, 2 weeks from now add like another use case last minute, and then kind of like I'd want, like, if we're doing like 1 rounds of like reviewing use cases, we get that in, get the SIG's opinion, and then if we want to add new things, we create a new doc and we iterate. Maybe some of the user stories from here get copied there. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a bit too specific around this. I'll defer to you, Ricardo.
I think that we can. My opinion is that we can move forward and probably work on this in the next cycle or in the V2. Also, Abhishek has sent the issue asking for DNS selector and CIDR selectors, and Tim has just put that DNS seems unlikely on an HTTP proxy. So it's not, as the first proposal of this was, what can we add to the network v1 policy without messing or like generating some sort of conflicts in people like, oh, do you want to really do this? I think that adding DNS themes, FQDN is going to mess up a lot of things, and we are probably going to lose the train for those additions that are also going to help like Jay and the others in other stuff that they are hacking in network policy with port sets and names. So I think we are trying to move a lot of things and my opinion is that we can move with those three and ask later what people think about that.
Okay, Gobin, are you cool with that?
Yes.
But I also agree that in V2 we need to support CIDR also, or V1.5. Okay, so I'm going to add in this SIG network meeting. We are out of time. Sorry. I'm going to add this like a time window of 10 minutes. I expect all of you to help me to explain all of those cases, please. Don't let me be massacred by the other folks from the SIG. And I think that's it. So as they accept this, I'm going to open the issues. And I ask for all of you the help to write the caps because I have some pretty limited time also and some pretty limited knowledge. So any help is really, really well received. Jay, anything else?
I have one more question. Maybe you guys already covered. Sorry, Jay, before you close us out. This doc, is this coming back? Or I guess I'm confused about what happens with it next. Like, does it get merged in to the main repo or like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. So this doc is only like a summary of what we are going to do. I'm going to merge this into Jay's repo, so we don't lose the track about this one. That's going to be merged in the unofficial but official Jay's repo. And and we are going to discuss this in Thursday. As the SIG accept the discussion and say, okay, go ahead with that, we are going to open 3 issues, 3 or 1. I don't know if we are going to move. I think that 3 is better because each one of those are like different size. In the Kubernetes/enhancements repo, saying, okay, we are going to move forward with this cap, and then start writing the document in a PR that's going to turn into a markdown. And
I see.
To,
okay. Yeah.
That's a long way. That's still a long way.
Oh, that's good. That way we don't have like a 7th Google Doc.
Yeah.
Okay.
So does anyone know how to get access to these recordings?
Yeah, Jay has the link, I think.
YouTube.
Really?
Yeah, we're internet famous. We're on the internet. We're like, you can show your friends.
Okay. All right.
So I think we are all out of time. Anyone have anything else? Otherwise, have a nice week. Thank you all. Help me on Thursday. Don't let me alone, please.
So you're gonna send something to the mailing list? Is that what you said?
Yeah,
or
I can send out. Yeah, no, I'm gonna send this also to the mailing list and ask people for their opinions. Thank you, folks. Have a nice week.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.